Hello and welcome to Boxing Tonight, Mirror Fighting's preview of this evening's bouts. It is, of course, Fright Night. It is, of course, Halloween. I'm Martin Dorman, joined by Rich Jones on one of my sides. Anyway, there are world title fights in America tonight, but our focus is very much in London, in the UK, on the heavyweight division, as Oleksandr Usyk faces an acid test, you could say, against Derek Chisora, who's bidding to prove he is not just a gatekeeper to the division's elite. Rich, I think I'm right in saying that you are with me on this, that the anticipation has really been building these last few months, particularly, or maybe because of the delay, and because it looks like Chisora's definitely at least taking it seriously. I'm just starting to think, as I think a lot of people are, maybe there could be an upset in the air.
Yeah, 100%. It's such a fascinating fight. There's so much to it. Obviously, you've got Usyk, who, conquered the cruiserweight division. He's such a good technical fighter, such a good boxer. But then you've got Chisora, who's like the epitome of the sort of big, strong heavyweight. Like you say, we've waited so long for it that now it's finally here. The build-up's been great. And yeah, I think everyone's really looking forward to this one, seeing what's going to happen, because it could go so many different ways.
Very much a contrast in the two fighters, both in their personalities and in their fighting styles. We saw the weigh-in yesterday, Chisora, who actually been quite calm all week, but slapped on the war paint and really sort of took it to Usyk, if you like, at the weigh-in. But there was no violence, there was no fisticuffs, just good old-natured stare down. But let's have a look at Usyk first. He is almost 3 stone lighter, which is obviously no surprise. But I think he sort of started to get a little bit annoyed this week by the constant questions about his size and how he can cope with the bigger men in the heavyweight division. And he said, listen, I've been fighting heavyweights all my life in the world series of boxing, sort of amateur, professional, hybrid, go-between competition. He fought Joe Joyce, who's no small man. So maybe one day the size might be an issue if it's Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua, but I'm not convinced size is as big an issue as some people are making out.
No, I agree. He's got plenty of experience against sort of bigger guys, like you say. Joe Joyce, not a small guy by any means, and he's done well sort of in that amateur series at heavyweight. But then again, it is professional boxing's a different game, isn't it? And obviously Chisora's a big guy, he's a big puncher, he's a big frame. I don't think size will have a huge difference, but it's obviously going to have some impact on the fight. It's obviously going to have some role, especially for someone like Usyk, who likes to sort of fight on the front foot, sort of control the middle of the ring. He likes to have that space sort of behind him to sort of move into and counter and stuff like that. And if Chisora's, working the jab well, if he's got the sort of power to just sort of push him back onto the ropes, then it does probably make it a different fight and change things a little bit. But I don't think it's going to be a huge issue, but it is obviously going to make things a little bit tougher for Usyk to do the things that he normally does and usually did with fairly, with ease in the cruiserweight division, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Chisora talks about the inevitability that he will get to Usyk, as in he will reach him, he will get inside and then be able to work, and he hopes he has a referee who allows him to do that. But I'm not sure it's as simple as that. He may well do. Listen, will Usyk get hit? I'm absolutely sure he will. But when you watch his fights, and when you look at the cruiserweight division, even then, they're still big hitters. These are not small guys, and people like Murat Gassiev barely laid a glove on him in the World Boxing Super Series. So I'm not going to, I don't know. I think Chisora will get very, very frustrated. And the longer it takes him to get in there and to actually be able to feel like he's having some success to then maybe look for a knockout later on, I just think he might get so bewildered that he could be in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, and I think from what I've seen, I think that Usyk's so good he's so fast on his feet, and he's so good at that sort of stepping out of range, and then as someone comes in to hit him, sort of hitting them with a couple of counter shots. And I think the picture there of him against Bellew, and Bellew said as well about how well he times his punches. And I think the issue is for Chisora to get to Usyk, he's probably going to end up taking a couple of well-timed punches on the way in a lot of the time. And like you say, Usyk's not a small guy. He's got a powerful punch. He times his punch as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if that grinds down Chisora before Chisora is able to grind him down himself. But at the same time, it's, you know, obviously Chisora can hit hard. If he can get to him, there's a chance he can do damage. I mean, yeah, it's hard to see where it'll go. I mean, it's tough to predict because obviously I think everyone who thinks Usyk is going to win on points. But to be honest, I could possibly see it. I could see it going either way, but I could see him stopping Chisora as well. That wouldn't surprise me. I don't know about you.
I definitely, my call, if you like, is late for Usyk, just because I do just think he will just grind him down. And we'll come on to Chisora in a bit. He's definitely a different man than he has been. I don't think he'll quit necessarily, but I do think he might get to a point where just physically and mentally he's exhausted, and maybe it comes to a point where the referee sort of saves him almost. So I would sort of say in the latter quarter of the fight for Usyk. For me, I mean, you mentioned the Bellew fight. We saw the pictures there. Excuse me. Bellew did hit Usyk. You know, there was no doubt about that. In those first few rounds, he was hittable and he was hit. But Bellew was basically he was absolutely a cruiserweight. Of course, at that point, a cruiserweight, he did go up to heavyweight, but he wasn't really a heavyweight. So I wonder whether Usyk thought, well, you know what, I can take those punches. So I'm going to allow myself almost to take them to get in there. And I think he's not daft. He knows what Chisora can do. You saw him against Spilka. You saw him against Takam when he really laid those guys out. Particularly against Takam is an interesting one because he was losing the fight and then just pulled that shot out in the 8th round. So I think Usyk, as I say, he's not silly. He knows. So I think he will be slightly more cautious and therefore won't be hit as often as maybe Bellew was. And obviously in the end, Bellew was absolutely flattened.
Yeah, but then I think that also is what makes it such an interesting fight, is that we can say all we like about Usyk and how good he is, but ultimately, like you say, we've seen Chisora just lay out much bigger men with, you know, a single punch pretty much. He's hit some devastating knockouts in the past. And I think that's the sort of fight that's why everyone loves heavyweight boxing, because we can say what we like about Usyk being the better boxer, but, you know, we all know that Chisora's got shots in his locker that can knock out pretty much anyone. So, you know, we can break it down as much as we like, but there's always going to be that sense of intrigue that Chisora is always going to be in with a puncher's chance. Although I agree with you that I think Usyk's probably going to be too clever and move too well to, you know, he's probably going to avoid some of those punches. But it's going to be interesting. There's definitely, you know, Chisora's got more than a puncher's chance, and I think we're going to come on to him in a bit, but he looks in great shape as well. So who knows?
Well, I think if in 24 hours or so Chisora's won by stoppage, of course it would be a surprise and a shock, if you like, in terms of the odds and stuff, but we wouldn't be stunned. I mean, it wouldn't be as big a shock, let's say, as Ruiz against Joshua. You know, it's not, for me anyway. I don't know about you, but I still, you know, it would be perfectly acceptable if that's what he does because of the size difference and because of the power he carries. And as you mentioned, like, he looks in phenomenal shape. Basically, been training for this fight for a year. And I love the fact that he and David Haye have managed to put up with each other. Like, you almost imagine it as a relationship of convenience. You know, they'd not necessarily want to be together, but Chisora knows that David Haye knows how to get into shape. He knows how to put a training program together, which has not always been Chisora's strong point. And David Haye knows, well, David Haye basically, if he wants to be relevant in boxing, kind of needs Chisora a little bit because he doesn't have much else going on. And he sees Chisora, it would seem from what he said, as a man who can still compete at the highest level.
Yeah, I think if there's anyone that's convincing you that this is Chisora's fight to win, it's David Haye. He's been talking the talk all week, or for a few months now even. But like you say, you've seen all the clips, you've seen Chisora, he is in great shape. And I think it's interesting with Haye in his corner as well, because obviously if anyone knows about stepping up from cruiserweight to heavyweight, it's David Haye, who obviously stepped up and became heavyweight world champion against Nikolai Valuev, who was a huge guy. So that's quite an interesting dynamic as well. I think the fact that, you know, if anyone's going to be able to give Chisora the intel on, you know, what Usyk's not going to like, you know, moving up against a bigger guy, then, you know, I'm sure Haye's got some interesting pointers to give out. But yeah, it's a fascinating relationship. I don't think anyone ever thought, well, no one saw that coming when they were sort of separated by that cage all those years ago. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think if, like you say, if Chisora does pull a win out of the bag against Usyk, then it's going to reflect. Obviously, it's going to be a huge win for Chisora, but it's also going to reflect really well on David Haye, and it'll be a massive moment for him as well in his post-boxing career. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's interesting to keep watching that relationship develop, and it'll be quite interesting to see what happens with him if he does lose as well. To be fair,
yeah, I think what Chisora will definitely miss is, as a lot of boxers have, is the fans. He's become a real fan's favourite over the last couple of years, which he wasn't before, really. So it would be, excuse me again, it'd be really sad to see him lose badly, and then sort of fade off into the sunset. Of course, there's a bigger picture here in terms of the heavyweight division. From a selfish fan's point of view, if we have a really close fight and it turns into a real dogfight, but then maybe Usyk still nicks it or whatever, maybe he has a rethink and thinks, you know what, I'm not ready for Joshua yet, so I'll have another fight, which then allows us to have Anthony Joshua against Tyson Fury for all the belts instead of maybe just the 3. So that's what I'm kind of hoping for. You know, I don't want it to be too one-sided. I don't want Usyk just, as good as that would be from a sort of purist point of view, to see someone just go in there and just dominate. I hope at some point we get a proper tear-up.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I think it is going to be. Even though I do think Usyk will probably win the fight, I do think it'll be a bit of a tear-up. I think Chisora will definitely have his moments. I don't think it'll be completely one-sided. So that'll be interesting. And yeah, I think it'd be probably good. I think that's one of the things with the heavyweight division, isn't it? As well, you've got the sort of big. Well, it was Fury, Wilder, Joshua. Obviously, Wilder's been beaten by Fury, but you need that crop just below the top guys to sort of make the division interesting. And I think for the depth of the division, if Chisora and Usyk can both come out of this with their reputations looking good, maybe Usyk does get the win, but Chisora puts up a good fight, then it's only going to add to the amount of fights that there are sort of in the long run and the way the division looks overall. I think it'd be good for the division to have sort of a couple more contenders that are, on the fringes. But for Chisora especially, it does seem a little bit now or never. He's been on the fringes for a while now. He's had a few step-up fights and hasn't quite got it done. So do you think he probably needs to try and pull it out of the bag here, really, if it's ever gonna really happen for him getting to that top level, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm a little bit, quite surprised that he's even here. I mean, if you think back to the fight in Monte Carlo against Caballero, who we may well see this year against Tyson Fury, he was dreadful that night, and there are circumstances around that. But the Derek Chisora that night, to me, just looked like someone who just didn't care anymore, wasn't interested in the fight game. So to have turned that around, we've talked about the wins over Spilka, Takam. He was beating Dillian White in their rematch till he got flattened again. On another night with the points deductions, especially, that could have gone so differently. Chisora could have won that, and then maybe there would have been a third fight, and maybe he would have gone on. Who knows? So I think for him to even get to this point is a victory of sorts. And then, as we've talked about, to have trained seemingly so well for a year now with David Haye, to be in shape. I mean, boxers will always say they've left no stone unturned. They've got no regrets. It would certainly seem from the outside that's where he is right now. And it would be, as I say, it'd be a shame to see him then dominated for 12 rounds and sort of just demoralised. But then again, I think, and then who does he fight? He's already had the fight against David Price, for example. And
I was just about to say as well, if he does lose and he loses, like if he gets sort of schooled for 12 rounds, and like you say, it's a demoralising one, it obviously seems like you mentioned the Caballero fight and he looked really flat. And then again, the Senad Gashi fight where Gashi did nothing but run, but Chisora looked quite flat in that as well. And you do wonder, obviously this fight he's been up for and he's trained so hard, and he was for the Dillian White fight as well. He trained so hard, he got in really good shape, and now he's in the shape of his life. But it's easy to get motivated to fight Oleksandr Usyk as the gatekeeper to the heavyweight division. But if he then loses this fight and then has to sort of, after putting in all that effort, he has to go back to the drawing board, and his next fight is probably like just a fight to get back into the swing of things. And then he has to sort of, at this point, if he loses now, he's probably going to have to rebuild again just to try and get back to the stage he was at. And he's 36. You do sort of wonder if he gets beaten where the Chisora's got the motivation left in him to sort of come back really and have to work his way up again. I do anyway. I think if he loses, I think we'd probably see him in the ring again at some point, but I just struggle to see where he'd find the sort of motivation almost to put himself through this sort of grueling camp again if this one doesn't pay off and he has to work his way up from the middle tier again, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it would be quite sad if he became a fighter who fought up and coming. I mean, I think you'll probably miss the likes of Joyce. Well, if Joyce was to lose to Dubois, then maybe Joyce Chisora, but you'll probably miss Dubois on his way up. It would be sad to see him become sort of cannon fodder for the younger fighters, because he doesn't train as hard. It doesn't mean as much, so he just comes in and gets beat. That would be really sad. So I think it would be, the best plan would then be to just sort of pick fights that were probably going to be good fights. So someone like Oscar Rivas, for example, I don't know what's in it for Oscar Rivas, but that would probably be a good fight for the fans. It would probably would go on pay-per-view these days, but at least on a pay-per-view card, and earn him some money. So, if he comes out with his head held high tonight, definitely some fun fights to have had. But yeah, it feels like a little bit make or break. But as I said, for him to have this chance in 2020, I'm a little bit surprised. So it's all a bonus in a way.
I mean, if he does win, we start talking about him getting some huge we get another British name in the mix with Fury and Joshua for the belts, don't we? Obviously, we all want Fury to fight Joshua, but if Chisora beats Usyk, who's the next in line, then you're probably going to have a case for Chisora pushing for his shot at either of them at some point, which, although Joshua or Fury would be the favourite, I'm sure you could have a lot of fun with the build-up with that, and it'd be a huge fight should it come around. I mean, there's a lot of things that got to happen between now and then, but talking hypothetically, there's huge opportunities if he does get a win. Definitely,
and I suspect if Chisora does win, he would probably say to Joshua and Fury, "Go and do your thing, have your your undisputed fight." Because as long as I get a shot somewhere, he's good friends with Anthony Joshua, and he sort of created this friendship with Fury. I remember definitely last year, if not the year before, Chisora, when he was sort of on his bad run or indifferent run, kept banging on about the trilogy fight with Tyson Fury. Fury's promised me this fight, and I thought, why? Oh, I can understand why, but why on earth would that fight ever happen? You were absolutely, in the rematch, he was just dominated from start to finish, retired on his stool. So I thought, that's just nonsense, just typical boxing nonsense. But you're right, now, who knows? Like, we could actually see somehow Chisora Fury 3 in 12 months' time for one or some of the belts, which would just be incredible.
Well, you mentioned it'd be a trilogy fight, and that'd surely be the most bizarre trilogy fight in a long time in terms of the paths they've both taken from the first to the second to the third fight. They've just gone completely different ways. Like, I'm not sure any trilogy fight the two fighters have probably gone so far away from each other on opposite ends and then back to one another. But we'll see. Obviously, a lot to happen before now and then. But I'm sure Oleksandr Usyk will have a thing or two to say about those plans. But we'll see.
Absolutely. So, as we mentioned, the fights that are on Box Office, of course, starts from 6 p.m. with the first undercard fight. It's sort of an undercard that's been slightly decimated. We lost Dave Allen against Chris Lovejoy earlier this week, thanks to Don King. And then overnight, late last night, early this morning, we lost Kash Farouk's fight. So a 6-fight card, 5 on the undercard, 6 p.m. Sky Sports Box Office, 1995. And as I mentioned at the start, there are 2 world title fights in America. We have Gervonta Davis against Leo Santa Cruz. That fight's actually on Channel 5 through the night. And Jason Maloney challenges Noya Inoue, also in America. That is on fight.tv, and that's around about £10. Should you wish to buy it, I will be back tomorrow with a recap of tonight's fights, and then back on Monday with After the Bell with George Groves and Declan Taylor. Until then, thank you, Rich, and enjoy the fights, everybody.